The survey vessel arrived without announcement, without signal, and without expectation of being noticed. It slipped through the outer boundary of the system on a trajectory calculated for efficiency rather than discretion, because discretion was not considered necessary. The civilization on the third planet had been observed at a distance for some time. Atmospheric composition, electromagnetic leakage, orbital patterns, everything about it placed it firmly within a well-understood category. Pre-industrial to early industrial transition. Fragmented governance structures. No unified off-world capability. No evidence of faster-than-light research. No evidence of deep space infrastructure. No evidence of anything that would require immediate attention. The vessel did not slow as it passed the outer gas giants. It adjusted course once, briefly, to align its sensors with the inner system and then continued inward. The crew performed their duties with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times before. There was no urgency in their movements. No anticipation. They had seen worlds like this. They had seen hundreds. The third planet rotated beneath them, blue and white and green, its surface active with weather systems and continental drift patterns that indicated long-term geological stability. The atmosphere was dense with nitrogen and oxygen, carrying the signatures of biological processes that had been active for millions of years. It was, by every measurable standard, an ordinary living world. The first scans confirmed the initial classification. Surface populations were distributed across multiple landmasses. Technological output was localized and inconsistent. Energy production was significant by planetary standards but negligible by interstellar ones. There were satellites in orbit, primitive, numerous, and uncoordinated. The analyst assigned to the survey sat at his station and reviewed the data as it came in. He noted the presence of digital communication networks. He noted the fragmentation of languages and political entities. He noted the absence of any unified planetary defense system. He noted, in passing, the early stages of spaceflight. Chemical propulsion. Limited orbital capability. No permanent installations beyond low orbit. No extraplanetary industry. He recorded all of it with the same methodical precision he applied to every survey. The data was categorized, cross-referenced, and appended to the central archive. It was in every respect unremarkable. The vessel entered high orbit without resistance. There was no response from the surface beyond the continued operation of their communication systems, which did not appear to register the presence of an object of this scale. Their sensors, what few they had, were not calibrated to detect something that did not announce itself. The crew conducted a full spectral sweep of the planet and its immediate surroundings. No hidden installations. No anomalous energy readings. No evidence of external influence. The conclusion began to take shape before the scan was complete. The analyst opened the report file and began to write. He described the planet in standard terms. He described the population density, the technological level, the absence of unified governance. He described the orbital environment and the lack of significant off-world activity. He moved to the assessment section. Threat classification. He paused, not because there was uncertainty, but because the framework required the step. Every surveyed civilization was assigned a classification. It was part of the process. He entered the designation without hesitation. No spacefaring capability beyond early orbital activity. No capacity for interstellar interaction. No threat to Dominion interests. Minimal diplomatic priority. He reviewed the line once, out of habit, and found no reason to change it. Recommended action. Standard monitoring protocol. He entered the interval. 200 years. It was a routine number. Long enough that any meaningful change in capability would be detectable in aggregate data. Short enough that no unexpected development would go entirely unnoticed. He saved the document and transmitted it to the Survey Command archive. The vessel remained in orbit for another 6 hours to complete secondary scans. Biological sampling was conducted remotely. Atmospheric readings were refined. A limited collection of surface transmissions was recorded for linguistic analysis, though no immediate effort was made to translate them. There was no contact attempt. That was not the purpose of a survey mission. Contact was reserved for civilizations that met a threshold. This one did not. The decision was not debated. It did not require discussion. It was embedded in the protocol the same way orbital mechanics were embedded in the navigation system. You did not question it. You followed it. The vessel adjusted its position once more, aligning itself for departure. From the surface, nothing changed. The planet continued its rotation. The weather systems moved across the oceans. The populations below continued their lives without interruption, unaware that they had been observed, measured, and categorized. Unaware that a decision had been made about them. The engines engaged with a controlled release of energy that did not register on any instrument available to the civilization below. The vessel accelerated out of orbit, past the satellites that circled the planet in slow, predictable paths, past the boundary where their detection systems faded into irrelevance. It did not look back. The final transmission was logged, archived, and indexed among thousands of similar reports. Another world surveyed. Another classification assigned. Another entry in a system that had functioned without significant error for centuries. The file would remain there, accessible, complete, and correct in every factual detail it contained. It would not be reviewed again for a very long time. On the third planet, the signals continued to move across the surface, carrying voices and data and fragments of thought between billions of individuals who had no reason to believe they were being watched. Some of those signals, by coincidence rather than design, contained discussions of the sky, of the possibility that they were not alone, of what they would do if something from beyond their world ever arrived. The survey vessel was already gone by the time those conversations took place. The archive recorded the state of the civilization at the moment it had been observed. It did not record what came after. It did not ask what might happen if a developing species became aware, even indirectly, that it had been seen and left without explanation. It did not consider the possibility that the absence of contact could itself be a form of contact. 200 years was entered as a number. It was not considered as time. Time in which a question could take root. Time in which that question could be taken seriously. Time in which an entire civilization might decide that not knowing was a problem that needed to be solved. The report was accurate. The classification was correct. The conclusion, as written, contained no errors. It was the question that had been incomplete, and no one at the time had any reason to notice. The monitoring systems activated as the survey vessel departed, transitioning from active observation to passive collection without interruption. They did not think. They did not interpret. They did not question. They recorded. A network of unmanned probes positioned at the outer edges of the system maintained their orbits with minor corrections, their sensors aligned toward the inner planets. They were designed for longevity rather than precision, redundancy rather than insight. If one failed, another compensated. If several failed, the system degraded gracefully. Data continued to flow. Every transmission that left the third planet was captured. Not selectively. Not intelligently. Completely. Radio frequencies, optical signals, early digital traffic, later encrypted streams. Everything was collected, time-stamped, compressed, and transmitted in periodic bursts to a relay station positioned just beyond the system's outer boundary. From there, it entered the Dominion's archival network. No one was waiting for it. The archive did not require an audience. It was a structure built to hold information, not to understand it. Storage capacity scaled automatically. Indexing protocols categorized incoming data according to established schemas. Planetary designation. Signal type. Origin coordinates. Language markers when identifiable. The system performed its function with perfect consistency. Year 1 became Year 10. Year 10 became Year 50. The data accumulated. On the third planet, the signals changed. At first, the differences were minor. Incremental improvements in transmission clarity. Slight increases in frequency density. New patterns emerging in the structure of digital communication. The probes recorded all of it without distinction. To them, a refinement in encoding efficiency carried the same weight as a fluctuation in atmospheric ionization. It was all data. On the surface, the civilization reorganized itself in ways that were not immediately visible from orbit. Networks expanded. Infrastructure grew. Energy production increased in uneven but persistent increments. Conflicts occurred. Resolutions followed. Borders shifted. Alliances formed and dissolved. The probes recorded the electromagnetic signatures of all of it. They did not assign meaning. A decade passed in which the number of orbital objects around the planet increased by a measurable percentage. Artificial satellites multiplied, their functions diversifying. Communication, observation, navigation. The orbital space grew crowded, then structured, then regulated. The monitoring system updated its object tracking index accordingly. It did not flag the change. 50 years into the monitoring interval, the first sustained off-world transmission was detected. It originated from beyond low orbit. A small object, chemically propelled, broadcasting telemetry and data back to the surface. Its trajectory intersected with the gravitational influence of a neighboring planetary body before degrading into silence. The probes recorded the launch, the flight path, the transmission, and the termination. The data was categorized under early extraplanetary activity. No alert was generated. The classification remained unchanged. The archive expanded. The volume of stored information reached thresholds that, in other contexts, would have required review. Here, it triggered only an increase in allocated storage. Additional servers came online. Indexing protocols adjusted to maintain retrieval efficiency. No one retrieved anything. On the third planet, the pace of development did not remain constant. It accelerated. The reasons for this acceleration were distributed across millions of individual decisions, none of which were visible as singular events from the perspective of the monitoring system. Research initiatives, resource allocations, cultural shifts, the redirection of industrial capacity toward specific goals. Individually, they were noise. Collectively, they formed a pattern. The probes recorded the pattern as a series of unrelated data points. A new class of transmission appeared approximately 60 years into the monitoring period. High frequency, tightly encoded, resistant to passive decryption. The system captured it, flagged it as encrypted, and stored it with the rest. The volume of these transmissions increased over time. The archive noted the increase. It did not interpret it. Orbital infrastructure expanded beyond what had previously been observed. Permanent installations began to appear. Small at first. Functional. Then larger. More complex. Coordinated in ways that suggested centralized planning. The probes updated their object catalogs. No alert was generated. The classification remained unchanged. Deep within the Dominion's data network, the Terran Sector archive occupied a defined space. It was labeled, indexed, and complete. It contained decades of uninterrupted observation, a continuous record of a civilization in motion. No one accessed it. There were protocols for review, scheduled audits, analytical sweeps triggered by specific thresholds. None of those thresholds were met. The system had been designed around civilizations that followed predictable developmental curves. Gradual progress. Observable milestones. Clear transitions from one capability tier to the next. This one did not present those transitions in ways the system recognized. Its development was uneven. Bursts of rapid advancement followed by periods of consolidation. Divergent paths pursued simultaneously. Redundancies built into systems that did not yet require them. From the perspective of the archive, it was noise. From the perspective of the civilization producing it, it was preparation. 70 years into the monitoring interval, a signal was transmitted from the third planet that did not resemble any previous pattern. It was not directed outward in a focused beam. It was not a broadcast intended for a specific receiver. It was a wide-spectrum emission, encoded but intentionally detectable, repeating at regular intervals. The probes captured it in full. The archive stored it. No one translated it. If it had been translated, it would have revealed a structured message, a statement of intent, a declaration of a program whose scope extended beyond the planet itself. It would have referenced the sky, the unknown, the possibility of external observation. It would have made clear that the civilization was no longer operating under the assumption that it was alone. The monitoring system did not make that distinction. It recorded the signal and moved on. 80 years into the interval, the volume of data in the Terran Sector archive had reached a scale that made manual review impractical without dedicated resources. The index contained millions of entries. Transmission logs, orbital records, atmospheric readings, population estimates derived from surface activity. All of it accurate, all of it unused. The classification remained in place. No threat. Minimal priority. The number sat in the archive as a fixed point, unchanged by the flow of information around it. The probes continued their work. They recorded a launch from the surface that carried an object beyond the gravitational boundary of the planet with a trajectory that did not return. They recorded the construction of structures in orbit that maintained their positions without degradation over extended periods. They recorded energy outputs that exceeded previous baselines by orders of magnitude. Each event was stored. None were connected. The system functioned as designed. It did not fail. It did not malfunction. It did exactly what it had been built to do. It collected everything. It understood nothing. On the third planet, the question that had taken root decades earlier did not fade. It was refined. It was studied. It was answered, not with certainty, but with action. The civilization did not know what was beyond its system. It did not know if it had been observed. It did not know if something would return. It proceeded as though the answer to all of those unknowns could be the same. Prepare. The archive recorded the preparation in perfect detail. It did not recognize it as such. And so the data continued to accumulate year after year, a complete and uninterrupted account of a transformation that no one was watching. The anomaly did not announce itself as important. It appeared first as a minor inconsistency in a routine sweep, the kind of discrepancy that normally resolved itself when additional data points were included. A fluctuation in energy distribution at the outer edge of the Terran system. Not large. Not unstable. Simply out of place. The monitoring relay flagged it automatically and appended it to the incoming batch from the sector probes. The archive received it, indexed it, and placed it alongside millions of similar entries. Under normal circumstances, it would have remained there. The difference was not in the data. The difference was in who happened to be looking at the index when it arrived. Prex Tuan had not been assigned to the Terran sector. His current work involved comparative analysis of mid-tier industrial civilizations transitioning toward early interstellar capability, a task that required broad pattern recognition rather than deep focus on any single system. The Terran archive existed on the periphery of that work, one of many datasets available for reference. He accessed it because he needed a control sample. The query parameters were standard: long-term technological progression, signal density over time, energy output curves. The system returned several options. The Terran sector archive appeared in the list with a completeness rating that made it useful for baseline comparison. 80 years of uninterrupted data. He selected it without particular interest. The interface populated with summary metrics. Transmission volume increasing over time. Orbital object count trending upward. Energy production showing nonlinear growth patterns. None of it immediately remarkable in isolation. He began to refine the query. Segment by decade. The system complied, reorganizing the data into discrete intervals. He scanned the first segment. Early-stage industrial signatures. Fragmented communication networks. Limited orbital presence. Consistent with the classification. He moved to the second segment. Incremental improvements. Increased signal coherence. Early attempts at off-world activity. Still within expected parameters. He moved to the third. The curve shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would trigger an automated alert, but enough that it did not align cleanly with the comparative models he had been working with. The rate of change had increased. He adjusted the scale. Normalized against known developmental curves. The deviation became more apparent. He did not draw a conclusion. He adjusted the query again. Focus on energy output. The graph resolved into view. A steady rise, as expected. Then a sharper incline. Then a plateau. Then another incline, steeper than the first. Stepwise growth. He leaned back slightly, considering it. That pattern suggested directed effort, not random advancement, not diffusion of technology across a fragmented system. Coordinated development. He opened the Orbital Object Index. The number of entries had increased significantly over the monitoring period. That was not unusual in itself. What was unusual was the distribution. Clusters of objects occupying stable positions relative to one another. Patterns that suggested infrastructure rather than debris. He isolated a subset. Permanent installations. The system highlighted several entries. Dates of first appearance. Duration of operation. Functional classification where available. Some of the classifications were incomplete. He selected one. The data expanded. Structural dimensions. Emission profiles. Rotational characteristics. He paused. The scale was larger than expected for a civilization at this classification level. Not impossible, but not consistent. He cross-referenced the entry with transmission logs. Encrypted signals. High frequency. Sustained over long durations. He opened a sample. The data stream resolved into an encoded sequence that the system had not translated. It was not within the standard linguistic frameworks. It had been flagged and stored. He ran a preliminary analysis. The structure suggested intentional obfuscation. Not commercial encryption. Not civilian. Something else. He did not assign a label. He added it to the working set. The anomaly that had initiated the relay flag remained in the background of his query. He brought it forward. Outer system. Energy fluctuation. He expanded the data. The reading was consistent across multiple probes. Not a sensor error. Not a transient event. A stable output, low intensity but sustained. He overlaid it with the system map. The location did not correspond to any known natural phenomenon. He adjusted the filters. Remove stellar interference. Remove background radiation. Isolate artificial signatures. The signal remained. He zoomed out. The position was at the edge of the system's boundary, just within the region where the monitoring probes maintained their outermost positions. He checked the timestamps. The signal had appeared recently, within the last standard year. He searched the archive for similar readings. None. He searched for correlated events. A delay. Then a result. A launch from the third planet. Massive compared to previous launches. Energy expenditure orders of magnitude higher. Trajectory not directed toward a neighboring planetary body, but outward, toward the system boundary. He aligned the timelines. The launch preceded the appearance of the anomaly by a measurable interval consistent with transit time. He did not move for several seconds. Then he initiated a deeper scan request. The system processed it, pulling additional data from the probes closest to the anomaly. Higher resolution. Narrower focus. The result took longer than usual to compile. When it appeared, it did so without emphasis. A set of readings. Structural outlines inferred from sensor returns. Energy signatures mapped across a shape that was too regular to be natural. He adjusted the visualization parameters. The outline sharpened. Not fully defined. Not complete. But enough. A structure. Positioned at the boundary of the system. Maintaining station. He compared the scale against known constructs. It did not match any. He adjusted again. Maximum estimate based on available data. The numbers updated. He read them once. Then again. Then he reduced the estimate by a margin to account for uncertainty. The result remained outside expected parameters. He sat with the data, not rushing to interpret it. The classification file remained open in a secondary window. No threat. Minimal priority. He looked at the structure again. He opened a new report file. The interface waited. He entered the system designation. Terran sector. He began to write. Initial observation. Anomalous energy signature detected at outer system boundary. He described the signal. The location. The consistency across multiple probes. He documented the correlated launch event. He described the inferred structure. He did not speculate. He did not assign intent. He recorded what the data supported. He reached the assessment section. He paused. Not because he did not have information, because the framework required a category. He considered the existing classification. He did not change it. Not yet. He entered a provisional note. Further analysis required. He saved the document. He did not transmit it. Not immediately. Instead, he ran one more query. Full system scan. Focus on outbound trajectories over the past decade. The system returned multiple entries. Smaller than the initial launch, but following similar vectors. Outward. He added them to the report. He looked at the structure one more time. It remained where it was. At the edge of the system. Not moving. Not hiding. Waiting, if that was the correct word. He closed the visualization and prepared the report for transmission. Before sending it, he added a single line at the end of the observation section. The phrasing was precise. The wording deliberate. Observed development does not align with existing classification model. He transmitted the file. In the archive, the classification remained unchanged. For the moment, the report did not trigger an alarm. At least, not immediately. In the Dominion systems, alarms were not emotional responses. They were thresholds. Hard-coded limits that, when crossed, forced escalation. What Prex Tuan had submitted did not cross those limits. It described anomalies, not certainties. It contained inferred structures, not confirmed assets. It was still, technically, within the margin of observational noise. So it entered circulation like everything else, routed through intermediate review queues, tagged for potential follow-up, and assigned a priority level that was, by design, conservative. For 17 hours, nothing happened. Then the second analyst opened it. Her name was Sarah Vallon, assigned to structural anomaly verification within survey intelligence. Her work was not discovery, but validation. She did not find new things. She confirmed whether other people were wrong. She read Prex Tuan's report with the same detachment she applied to all incoming cases. Initial observation, anomalous energy signature at outer system boundary. She checked the raw data feed. The probe logs matched. The signal was real. That alone was not unusual. Instrument artifacts were common. Misaligned readings even more so. But as she stepped through the dataset, something subtle began to emerge. The correlation between events. She pulled the launch timeline. A surface-to-orbit event from the third planet. High energy. Sustained burn profile. Extended acceleration phase beyond typical chemical propulsion capacity. The system had already flagged it as advanced industrial. She overlaid the trajectory with the outer system anomaly. The alignment was too clean. She adjusted the parameters, introducing time drift tolerance. The correlation held. She frowned slightly. Not in surprise. In concentration. She expanded the dataset further. Additional outbound trajectories appeared. Not many. Not enough to suggest saturation, but enough to suggest repetition. Patterned repetition. She opened the orbital object map. The structure at the boundary was still there. Still unresolved. Still classified as inferred. She requested higher resolution imaging from adjacent probe clusters. The system responded with delay. The probes were not designed for focused imaging at that distance. Resolution improved incrementally as multiple feeds were merged. When the composite image stabilized, the structure became clearer. Sarah Vallon stopped typing. It was not a station. Not in the way stations were defined within Dominion taxonomy. Stations were modular, standardized, built from known structural frameworks that allowed for predictable classification. This was not that. The object was too large to be a conventional platform, too structured to be debris, too stable to be transient construction. She rotated the feed. The geometry did not simplify. If anything, it became more complex. She pulled up comparative databases, known megastructures, mining platforms, relay stations, defensive installations. None aligned. A slow realization formed, not as a conclusion, but as a narrowing of possibilities. This was built, not formed, not assembled from pre-existing Dominion templates. Built. She opened the material composition estimates. Uncertain, incomplete readings, reflective interference across multiple bands. But one detail repeated across all sensor arrays. Redundancy, excess structural reinforcement. Not efficient, not optimized, deliberately resilient. She leaned forward slightly. That detail mattered. Civilizations at Class F did not build redundancy at this scale. They optimized for immediate utility. Resource scarcity limited over-engineering. Redundancy was a luxury of advanced industrial systems with stable interstellar supply chains. She checked the energy signature again. Still stable. Still low emission relative to its size. That was wrong. A structure of that estimated mass should produce detectable thermal output even in passive mode. Waste heat alone would register across multiple probes. But it didn't. She increased the sensitivity threshold. A faint background pattern appeared. Not heat. Not propulsion. Something more controlled. Energy containment. She paused again. Then opened the construction timeline tool. No clear build sequence was visible. That was the next inconsistency. Large structures, regardless of origin, left incremental signatures. Assembly phases. Transport emissions. Orbital debris trails. Even stealth construction left distortion patterns in surrounding material fields. This did not. It appeared too clean. Too finished. As if the system had not observed its creation. She cross-referenced with the launch data again. Multiple outbound trajectories. Increasing frequency over time. All directed toward the same region. The structure. She exhaled slowly. Then opened a secure channel. Not escalation yet. Verification first. She transmitted a priority query to Prex-Tuan. Subject. Confirmation of outer system structure classification. While waiting, she expanded her own report. Her classification section remained unchanged. Classif. Minimal priority. But her cursor lingered over it longer than protocol required. Because for the first time in her career, she was looking at a dataset that did not behave like a Class F civilization. It behaved like something that already knew it was being watched. The response from Prex-Tuan arrived within minutes. Concise. Unchanged. Further confirmation of anomaly. Recommend controlled escalation for observational priority adjustment. No classification change requested at this stage. No classification change. That was the key phrase. She stared at it, then minimized the window and reopened the structure feed. It had not moved. But now, she noticed something she had not before. A secondary emission pattern. Very faint. Periodic. Not random. She isolated it. The signal repeated at fixed intervals. She ran a translation attempt against known communication protocols. No match. She adjusted again. Broadened the search. Still nothing. Then she did something outside standard procedure. She compared it against known detection patterns instead of communication patterns. And that changed everything. Because the structure was not broadcasting outward. It was broadcasting inward. Not to space. To the system. To everything within it. A low-frequency, wide-range emission designed not for message transmission, but for presence confirmation. Sarah Vallon felt something shift in her assessment of the file. Not fear. Not yet. Understanding. She reopened the classification field. She did not change it. But she added a private annotation stored outside official indexing protocols. First contact probability no longer negligible. Then she transmitted her verification report. This time, she marked it for conditional escalation review. And waited. The conditional escalation review did not move quickly. In Dominion systems, escalation was not about urgency. It was about certainty. Every step upward in classification required reduction of ambiguity, and ambiguity was the one resource the situation did not lack. So the report stacked. Prex-Tuan's initial anomaly file. Sarah Vallon's structural verification. Probe telemetry summaries. Correlation overlays. Each layer added clarity in one dimension while deepening uncertainty in another. At the third review tier, the analyst assigned was not a survey specialist or structural verifier. He was a classification auditor. His role was simple: resolve contradictions between observation and model. His name was Drexovan. He opened the Terran sector file expecting noise. He found consistency. That was the first problem. Noise fluctuates. Noise contradicts itself. Noise is uneven, incomplete, self-correcting only when filtered aggressively. This dataset did not behave like noise. It behaved like a system. He began with the classification header. He did not change it. Not yet. He instead expanded the full historical record. 80 years of observation. Probe logs. Energy readings. Orbital tracking. Communication interception. Everything aligned internally. That was worse than contradiction. Because contradiction can be resolved. Consistency cannot be ignored. He isolated the outer system structure data first. Composite imaging. Multi-probe synthesis. Inferred geometry. The same problem appeared again. Too stable. Too defined. He adjusted the model assumptions. Increased error margins. Accounted for sensor degradation. Introduced probabilistic distortion factors. The structure remained. Now he tested a different approach. Reverse validation. Instead of asking what the structure could be, he asked what conditions would be required for it to appear in the data exactly as recorded. The system calculated for several seconds. Then returned a result. Insufficient environmental variables. He ran it again with relaxed constraints. Still insufficient. He narrowed the scope to known construction methods. Still insufficient. He stopped. That outcome was not normal. Because the system was not supposed to return impossible under observational uncertainty. It was supposed to return unresolved or insufficient data. He checked the underlying assumptions again. Probe sensitivity. Orbital coverage. Temporal resolution. All within expected parameters. Then where was the error coming from? He moved to the launch data. The outbound trajectories. They were clean. Too clean. He expanded the dataset to include all detected propulsion events over the last 80 years. A pattern emerged immediately. Not of chaos. Not of random industrial growth. But of directional intent. Every significant launch, regardless of scale, followed a vector bias toward the outer system boundary. He overlaid economic growth indicators. Energy production. Material extraction. Manufacturing output. They did not correlate with population pressure or planetary scarcity. They correlated with time. As if the civilization had been following a schedule. Drexovan leaned back slightly. That thought was dangerous. He suppressed it and returned to the data. He opened the encrypted transmission archive. Previously dismissed as unreadable, now flagged for reanalysis due to structural concerns. He ran a deeper decryption attempt using expanded pattern recognition protocols. The system returned partial alignment. Fragments of structure emerged. Not words. Not language in the traditional sense. But repeated symbolic frameworks. Intentional repetition patterns. He slowed the processing. Let the system build a probabilistic reconstruction. The result stabilized. Still incomplete. But no longer random. He did not attempt full translation. He didn't need it. The structure of the signal was enough. It was not external communication. It was coordination between distributed assets. He opened the final anomaly layer, the outer system structure again. And this time, he did not treat it as a single object. He decomposed it into functional segments. What had appeared as one massive installation resolved into interconnected modules. Each segment had a role. Each role had redundancy. Each redundancy had backup pathways. He paused, because he recognized the architecture style. Not Dominion. Not any known interstellar builder. But something older. Something that assumed loss. He cross-referenced known civilization design philosophies. Most civilizations optimized for efficiency. Fewer optimized for redundancy. Very few optimized for survivability under incomplete knowledge of threat. This structure did not assume stability. It assumed uncertainty. That was not typical of a Class F civilization. Drek Sovun opened the classification file again. Classif. No threat. Minimal priority. He stared at it longer this time. Then opened a secure advisory channel to the upper review board. Not escalation, but a formal contradiction notice. He began typing. Subject: Structural inconsistency in Terran's sector classification model. He paused halfway through the first line, because he realized something else. Every dataset they had collected over 80 years had been interpreted under the assumption that observation was passive. But the outer system structure was not passive. It was positioned. It was maintained. It was stable in a way that required continuous correction, which meant it was being actively maintained, which meant someone was still there. He finished the message, then added one final line. Observed infrastructure suggests ongoing system-level coordination beyond recorded technological baseline. He sent it. And for the first time since the Terran sector was classified, the archive did not feel like it was describing a civilization. It felt like it was describing a project. The contradiction notice changed the behavior of the system. Not immediately in policy, not visibly in command structure, but in something more subtle: attention. The Terran sector archive, previously routed through low-priority analytical channels, was quietly elevated into a semi-active review state. Not full escalation, not public alert, a controlled inspection loop. In Dominion bureaucracy, this was the moment just before things became real. A fourth analyst was assigned, not because the previous three were incorrect, but because consensus was now required. Her designation was HFY. Specialization: predictive failure modeling in incomplete data systems. She did not read the earlier reports in sequence. She read them in parallel, letting the system align inconsistencies automatically. What she saw was not contradiction. It was convergence. 3 independent analysts, using different methods, had all arrived at the same discomforting boundary. The classification no longer fit the behavior of the subject. She opened the Terran file directly. No preconceptions. No inherited assumptions. Just raw structure. The first thing she reviewed was the outer system installation. The so-called structure. By now, it had been reclassified internally as Unresolved Construct Cluster, though no formal change had been approved. HFY did not care about labels. She cared about failure modes. She began by asking a different question than her predecessors. Not what is it, but what would break it? She adjusted the model accordingly. Stress testing parameters. External force application. Resource depletion scenarios. Communication disruption. System isolation. The simulation returned an unexpected result. No single failure point existed. That was not normal. All engineered systems, regardless of origin, had at least one structural weakness. A dependency. A bottleneck. A central node whose removal would destabilize the whole. This did not. She expanded the model further. Multiple simultaneous failures. Still stable. Now she paused. Not because she was uncertain, because she recognized the implication. A system that does not fail under isolated or combined stress is not optimized for efficiency. It is optimized for endurance. She moved to the next dataset. Outbound trajectory records. She overlaid them with temporal construction estimates derived from probe drift corrections and orbital debris analysis. A timeline emerged, not of construction, of expansion. The structure at the boundary was not a single build event. It was a continuous accumulation of capability. Layered, reinforced, extended, maintained. She checked the energy signature again. Still low, still stable. That detail now mattered more than anything else, because stability at scale requires control. She opened the probe distribution map. The outer system was ringed with monitoring assets, but not uniformly. There were gaps, intentional ones. Regions where probe density decreased slightly due to gravitational interference and resource allocation logic. HFY highlighted them, then overlaid structural emissions again. The pattern changed. The structure was not simply sitting at the boundary. It was aligned with those gaps. She zoomed in. A realization formed slowly, not as shock, but as structural clarity. The construct cluster was not only built within sensor limits. It was built around them. She leaned forward and ran a full system assumption inversion. What if observation had been accounted for? The system processed the query longer than usual. When the result came back, it was minimal. Insufficient model separation between observer and observed system. She rephrased. What if the civilization being observed knew it was being observed? The system hesitated again, then returned a caution flag. High uncertainty, but not zero. HFY did not move for several seconds. Then she reopened the encrypted signal archive. Previously dismissed as unreadable, now reprocessed under a different assumption. Not communication, not noise, but coordination under observation. The reconstruction improved instantly. Patterns that had appeared meaningless now aligned into repetition cycles. Not messages, not instructions, but timing signals, synchronization pulses. She felt the structure of her understanding shift. Slowly, cleanly. This was not a civilization expanding blindly into space. This was a civilization building under surveillance. Every major technological milestone in the dataset now aligned with something else. Not internal development alone. Response timing. Each acceleration followed external observation windows. Each expansion phase aligned with probe data refresh cycles. She closed the file for a moment, then reopened the classification header. No threat. Minimal priority. She did not change it. But this time, she understood what it meant. It was not a description of capability. It was a description of expectation. She opened a secure board channel. Level 4 review. She did not request escalation. Not yet. She submitted instead a single structured statement. Observed system behavior is consistent with adaptive development under persistent external observation. Then she added something no prior analyst had written. Observer effect cannot be excluded from model. She paused before sending, because she understood what that implied. If the observer effect was real in this case, then every conclusion drawn so far was conditional, including the classification, including the assumption that humanity was passive. She sent the report, and for the first time in the entire Terran Sector Archive's history, the system did not simply record a civilization. It began to question the act of recording it. The Level 4 review did not escalate outward. It escalated inward. Within Dominion analytical hierarchy, some discoveries were not broadcast across systems. They were contained, compartmentalized, re-examined by increasingly constrained groups until either certainty or irrelevance was achieved. The Terran sector file entered that containment loop. 6 analysts now had access. Each one isolated in function, their conclusions compared only through synthesized summaries, never direct discussion. This was meant to prevent bias. Instead, it produced something far more dangerous. Parallel convergence without shared reasoning. At the center of that loop, the anomaly structure remained unchanged. The outer system construct cluster. Still stable. Still present. Still not understood. The 7th phase of review began when the Dominion Strategic Observation Council requested a compressed briefing. Not a report. A distilled answer. HFY was assigned to present. She stood before a projection interface that did not show Earth directly, but a layered abstraction of it. Data over time. Energy curves, orbital maps, transmission density fields, a civilization rendered as mathematical behavior. The council members did not look at her. They looked at the model. Summarize, one of them said. HFY did not hesitate. Terran sector does not conform to Class F developmental behavior, she said. No reaction. That statement alone was no longer surprising. She continued. Standard classification assumes linear progression, industrialization, orbital capability, limited extraplanetary expansion. Terran progression is nonlinear, but internally consistent. Another council member leaned slightly forward. Define nonlinear. Kale adjusted the display. Accelerated expansion phases followed by stabilization periods. Each acceleration correlates with external observational cycles that caused the first visible shift in the room. Not alarm, tension. She continued. The outer system construct cluster is not a singular structure. It is a distributed system of interlinked installations designed for sustained presence at system boundary limits. The pause. Then a question. Purpose. Kale Vire did not answer immediately, because the system did not return a single purpose. It returned multiple overlapping possibilities. She chose the one that mattered most. Continuity under uncertainty. Silence followed. Another council member spoke. You are suggesting defensive architecture. Kale corrected gently. I am suggesting adaptive architecture. The distinction mattered. Defensive systems assumed known threats. Adaptive systems assumed unknown observers. She advanced the model. The projection shifted. Now the outer construct cluster was shown not as a single ringed formation, but as a layered field of overlapping redundancies. Each module capable of independent operation. Each segment capable of compensating for loss. One council member finally spoke again. That level of redundancy is economically irrational. Kale replied immediately. Yes. That word hung in the air longer than expected. She continued. It is not optimized for efficiency. It is optimized for persistence under incomplete information. The council member frowned slightly. Incomplete information about what? Kale looked at the projection. Not at them. At us. The room did not react immediately. Not because they disagreed. Because the implication required restructuring thought. A civilization that builds as if it is being observed is not unusual. A civilization that builds its entire expansion curve around observation timing is. The briefing continued. Kale introduced the signal analysis. Synchronization pulses. Not communication. Coordination markers. She demonstrated how construction phases aligned with observational gaps in probe coverage. How outbound trajectories increased during probe recalibration cycles. How energy output spikes corresponded with monitoring refresh intervals. By the time she finished, the projection no longer looked like a civilization. It looked like a response. A structured response to being watched. The council remained silent for several seconds. Then one member finally asked the question that had been avoided across all previous reviews. If we remove observation, does it stop developing? Kale paused. That question had been simulated. The answer was not stable. Irrelevant variable, she said carefully. The council member frowned. Explain. Kale adjusted the model one last time. We do not have baseline data for unobserved behavior. Every dataset we possess exists under observation conditions. That was the core issue. There was no control sample. No untouched version of the civilization. Only the version that knew or might have known or behaved as if it knew. The council member leaned back. So we cannot determine intent. Kale replied. Correct. Or capability. Correct. A longer pause followed. Then another question. Then what exactly are we looking at? Kale Vire looked at the projection for a long time before answering. Not as an analyst, but as someone forced to name something the system could not categorize. A civilization that builds as if misunderstanding is not an option. Silence. Then the projection flickered. Not from error. From data update. A new reading had arrived from the Terran sector probes. The outer system construct cluster had emitted a new synchronized pulse. Stronger than previous ones. More structured. And for the first time, partially directed. Not outward. Not inward. But across the system boundary. The council members straightened slightly. Kale Vire did not move. She only opened the update log. And read the timestamp. It matched a moment in Dominion space. Not observation time. Transmission time. Someone somewhere had looked at them back. And the system, for the first time since classification began, stopped assuming it was the only one watching. The first reaction was not panic. It was verification. The Dominion did not react emotionally to anomalies. It reacted structurally. Every unexpected conclusion had to survive replication across independent systems before it was allowed to influence policy. So the Terran sector was duplicated. Not physically, informationally. 3 separate analytical environments were constructed, each seeded with the same raw probe data, the same historical logs, the same structural interpretations. 3 independent teams were assigned. No cross-communication allowed. The instruction was simple: confirm or invalidate reciprocal awareness. At the lowest level of command, the phrase was treated as a theoretical construct. At the highest level, it was understood as something far more delicate. The first team discarded the synchronization pulse immediately. They argued artifact interference, solar reflection distortion, probe feedback lag. They reconstructed the signal and found irregularities that justified dismissal. Their conclusion: noise misclassified as structure. No escalation. The second team did not dismiss it. They reconstructed it differently. They treated it as intentional emission, not communication, but marker signaling. Their conclusion: unknown civilization is capable of system-wide coordination, but intent remains unverified. No escalation. The third team took longer than the others, because they did something none of the prior analysts had done. They removed Dominion observation data entirely. They rebuilt the Terran timeline without probe influence corrections, without archival smoothing, without interpretive normalization. What remained was incomplete, fragmented, but revealing in its gaps. Entire phases of development appeared compressed, not missing, collapsed, as if multiple advancements had occurred between observation intervals, as if the civilization had advanced in places the probes were not looking, or could not resolve. The outer system construct cluster became central to their recalibration. When stripped of interpretive assumptions, it was no longer a structure. It was a framework, a distributed architecture spanning orbital boundary regions, maintaining persistent presence in areas least likely to be continuously observed. One analyst finally spoke during internal review. If this is adaptive construction, he said, then observation itself is part of the variable. No one contradicted him. Instead, they reran the models. This time, they introduced a new parameter: active response hypothesis. The results destabilized several predictive frameworks. Because once you assume response, every earlier assumption becomes conditional, even classification. Meanwhile, on the Dominion Council level, Kale Vyer's earlier briefing was being re-evaluated in light of the synchronization update. The pulse had not just been detected. It had been mapped, and its directionality was no longer ambiguous. It aligned with multiple Dominion relay vectors. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough to suggest intentional alignment toward known observation infrastructure. One council member finally broke silence during the emergency review. That implies awareness of our monitoring network. Kale Vyer did not respond immediately. She was watching a recalculated model update in real time. The Terran construct cluster had adjusted. Not physically, but behaviorally. The emission pattern changed. Subtle modulation in frequency bands. A restructuring of timing intervals. It was responding. Not randomly, not instinctively, deliberately. She spoke quietly. It implies awareness of our presence, she corrected. Another council member leaned forward. Or coincidence. Kale shook her head once. No coincidence sustains alignment across multiple independent detection systems over 80 years. Silence returned. Then the council demanded full integration of all 3 team reports. When combined, the result was no longer fragmented interpretation. It was convergence. 3 separate analytical pathways now pointed to the same uncomfortable conclusion. The Terran civilization's development curve could not be fully explained without assuming interaction with observation itself. Not contact. Not communication. Interaction. The council chamber dimmed slightly as the projection updated. Now the outer system construct cluster was no longer static. It showed modulation, subtle structural shifts, realignment patterns, as if the system was adjusting itself in response to newly perceived awareness. A council member spoke quietly. If they are reacting to observation, then what happens when we change how we observe? HFY answered without looking away from the projection. Then we stop being predictable. That statement carried more weight than intended, because predictability was the foundation of Dominion's strategic dominance. Another update arrived. Faster this time. The Terran system had emitted another synchronized pulse. But this one was different. It was not just broader. It was structured with internal segmentation. Layers within layers. Like a message designed not for decoding, but for recognition of complexity. The signal analysis team hesitated before labeling it, because the simplest classification no longer applied. It was no longer transmission. It was acknowledgement. A council member finally asked the question that no one had wanted to voice. If this is acknowledgement, what are they acknowledging? HFY studied the projection for a long moment, then answered, "Us." The room did not respond immediately, because that answer changed the direction of every prior assumption. It meant the observation had become mutual, not in contact, not in diplomacy, in structure. And somewhere in the vast silence of monitored space, a civilization that had once been labeled Class F had begun behaving as if classification itself was no longer one-sided. The Dominion did not prepare for contact. It prepared for correction, because in its doctrine, contact implied equality of ignorance. What the Terran sector file now represented was something more uncomfortable, asymmetry that could no longer be assumed. HFY was summoned again, this time without the structured calm of a briefing chamber. The council interface had changed. More layers of authentication. More redundant observation filters. Even the room itself felt recalibrated, as if the Dominion was no longer certain how much of what it saw could be trusted without checking it twice. The projection of the Terran system hovered in the center. It was no longer a passive dataset. It was active. The outer construct cluster was emitting synchronized pulses at irregular intervals now, but with increasing structural clarity. Not randomness. Not chaos. Something closer to intentional variation. A pattern that changed just enough to remain unbroken. One council member spoke first. "We are now certain it is directed behavior." No one challenged it. HFY stepped forward. "There is another layer," she said. That drew attention immediately. She expanded the model. Not the physical structure. The behavioral overlay. The timing correlations. The observation response cycle mapping. As it expanded, the Terran system stopped looking like a constructed defense network. It looked like a mirror. Not reflecting appearance. Reflecting process. Every time Dominion observation intensity increased, Terran system structural emissions refined. Every time probe resolution improved, signal segmentation complexity increased. Every time analytical focus sharpened, outbound coordination vectors adjusted accordingly. One council member spoke quietly. "That is not defense." HFY replied. "No." The pause. Then she added, "It is adaptation to perception." Silence spread across the chamber. Because adaptation to environment was normal. Adaptation to being observed was not. A senior council member leaned forward. "If that is true, then what happens when observation stops?" Kale hesitated. Not because she didn't know. Because every simulation diverged beyond that point. "Irreversible uncertainty," she said finally. The words were carefully chosen. Not collapse. Not failure. Uncertainty. Because the system could not predict what a civilization would do once it could no longer confirm it was being measured. The projection updated again. This time, there was no new structure. No new construction. Only refinement. The outer cluster was tightening its emission pattern. Compressing signal variance. Increasing synchronization fidelity. It was becoming more precise. More aware of timing. One analyst whispered from the side station. "It is learning our observation rhythm." No one corrected him, because it was the only explanation that fit all data without contradiction. Then the second phase of the update arrived. A Dominion relay station, far from the Terran system, registered a matching pulse pattern. Not identical. Aligned. The council chamber froze. HFY's eyes narrowed slightly. That is not possible, one council member said immediately. But even as he spoke, another relay confirmed it. Then another. Not attacks. Not transmissions. Reflections. Each one subtly tuned to the local observation schedule of its respective monitoring node. The implications spread through the chamber faster than protocol could contain. Kale Vire spoke quietly. It is mapping us. A council member turned sharply. Mapping what? She didn't answer immediately, because the correct answer was not geographic. It was procedural. Our observation behavior. The council demanded clarification. She provided it. They are not responding to us as a civilization, she said. They are responding to us as observers. That distinction changed everything, because it meant the Terran system was not just aware of being observed. It was differentiating between observers. Not as individuals, as systems, as patterns of attention. The projection zoomed again. Now the Terran construct cluster emitted a layered pulse sequence. Each layer corresponded to a different Dominion relay signature. Not mimicking, not copying, aligning. The council member who had remained silent for most of the session finally spoke. If they can differentiate observation networks, then they can also differentiate intent. Kale Vire answered without hesitation. Yes. A long silence followed. Then the council asked the question that had been building since the first anomaly. Are we still the observers? Kale Vire looked at the projection. For the first time, the answer did not feel like analysis. It felt like position. We are one of them, she said. That was the turning point, because it meant the Dominion was no longer outside the system it studied. It was inside its observational field. And somewhere, beyond the boundary of classification, the Terran construct cluster emitted another synchronized pulse. But this time, it did not match any known Dominion schedule. It preceded it, by a fraction. Not enough to confirm causality, but enough to suggest anticipation. The council did not speak for several seconds. Then Kale Vire added the final observation of the session. They are no longer reacting to being observed. The pause. They are participating in the observation process. The chamber dimmed slightly as the system re-evaluated threat models. And for the first time since the Terran sector had been classified, the Dominion did not ask what humanity was. It asked what humanity had decided observation meant. The final review was not scheduled. It was triggered, not by command, by convergence. Across every Dominion monitoring node that still maintained contact with the Terran sector, a synchronized anomaly event occurred within the same narrow time window. No alarms, no breaches, no external intrusion signatures, just alignment. All observation feeds, across different relay stations, different analysts, different classifications, shifted at once. The Terran system was no longer behaving like a monitored subject. It was behaving like a distributed reference point. Kale Vire was not called. She was already there. The council chamber was fully sealed now. Layered observation dampeners active. Redundant verification loops running in parallel just to confirm that the room itself had not been influenced by what it was viewing. The projection at the center showed the Terran system in unprecedented clarity. The outer construct cluster had changed again. Not expanded. Not reinforced. Reorganized. What had once appeared as a defensive boundary was now a structured lattice spanning the outer system perimeter. Every segment now aligned with a precise observational vector. Not toward the Dominion, toward all known observation points. Every relay, every probe, every monitoring station that had ever recorded the Terran system. One council member spoke quietly. This is not a structure anymore. No one corrected him. Kale Vire stepped forward. It never was just a structure, she said. The projection updated in response. Not passively. In sync. A new layer appeared beneath the construct cluster. A mapping layer. Dominion observation architecture. Every relay route. Every sensor chain. Every data relay delay. Visualized. Not as interference. As a system. The council froze. Because what they were seeing was not espionage. It was comprehension. The Terran system was not simply aware of being observed. It had reconstructed the framework of observation itself. One analyst whispered, "That would require access to our internal timing architecture." HFY shook her head slightly. "No." The pause. "Only inference." That word changed the tone of the room. Because inference at that scale implied something no one wanted to name yet. The projection shifted again. Now, every Dominion observation node appeared as a point in a larger structure. Not scattered, not independent, connected, through correlation patterns that only became visible when viewed from outside the system of observation itself. A council member finally spoke. "This is not intelligence gathering." HFY answered, "No, it is model construction." Silence. Because that meant every observation ever conducted on the Terran system had not just collected data. It had contributed to something that now reflected it back. Another council member leaned forward. "Then what is the model for?" HFY looked at the projection for a long time, then answered, "For us." The chamber did not react immediately, because the implication was too large to compress into instinct. If the Terran system had built a model of the observers, then it had, in effect, completed the loop. Observation was no longer one-directional. It was recursive. The projection flickered again. A final synchronization pulse was emitted from the Terran construct cluster. But this time, it was not aimed. It was distributed across all known Dominion monitoring systems simultaneously. And embedded within it was a structural pattern that resolved cleanly only when mapped against Dominion observational timing protocols. HFY felt it before she fully understood it. Not a message. Not a warning. A confirmation. The Terran system was not responding to being observed anymore. It had finished incorporating observation into its own architecture. One council member finally spoke, voice low. "Are we the subject now?" HFY did not answer immediately, because the question itself assumed separation that no longer existed. She looked at the projection one last time, then spoke. "We were never separate." The chamber went silent. Outside the sealed council room, across every relay station, across every probe still watching the Terran system, across every archive storing 80 years of classified observation data, a single change propagated through the Dominion network. Not an alert, not an error. A reclassification request generated automatically by the system itself. Origin, unknown. Destination, all observers. Status, pending. And in the Terran system, at the edge of everything that had ever been measured, the construct cluster remained steady. Not expanding. Not reacting. Just present. As if it had always been there. As if it had simply been waiting for everyone else to notice what observation truly meant.